Storybook Squad. The Adventures of Mittens and Kittens. Chapter 1, The Lost Kitten. One summer day, a little kitten named Mittens went out to play in the garden. She was having a great time chasing butterflies and climbing trees, when suddenly she got lost. She didn't know how to get back to her home, and she was starting to get scared. Mittens wandered through the garden, calling out for her mother. She passed by flowers and bushes, but no one answered her calls. She was just about to give up when she saw a little mouse peeking out from behind a tree. "Hello there, little kitten," the mouse said. "What are you doing all alone in the garden?" "I'm lost," Mittens replied, her voice shaking. "I can't find my way back home." "Don't worry," the mouse said with a smile. "I'll help you find your way. My name is Whiskers, and I know this garden like the back of my paw. Follow me, and we'll find your home in no time." Mittens followed Whiskers through the garden, and before long, they saw a cozy little house in the distance. It was Mittens' home. She ran to the door and knocked, and soon her mother opened the door and scooped her up in a hug. "Oh, Mittens, I've been so worried about you," her mother said, kissing her on the head. "I'm so glad you're safe and sound." Mittens was happy to be home, and she thanked Whiskers for his help. From then on, she always made sure to stay close to home, and she and Whiskers became the best of friends. Chapter 2, The Magical Forest. As Mittens grew older, she became more and more curious about the world around her. She loved to explore the garden, but she started to wonder what lay beyond the gates. One day, she decided to sneak out of the garden and go on an adventure. She crept through the gates and found herself in a magical forest. The trees were tall and green, and the sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns on the ground. Mittens saw all sorts of animals running and playing, and she knew she had to join in. She ran through the forest, chasing butterflies and leaping over logs. She climbed to the top of a tree and looked out at the beautiful landscape. She saw a stream in the distance and decided to follow it. As she walked along the stream, she saw a beautiful rainbow-colored fish jumping out of the water. She reached out to touch it, but the fish darted away, leaving behind a trail of sparkles. Mittens followed the sparkles and soon found herself at the entrance to a hidden cave. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should go in. But her curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped into the cave. It was dark and cool inside, and Mittens could barely see in front of her. She felt her way along the walls, and before long, she saw a faint light in the distance. She followed the light and soon found herself in a room filled with treasure. There were glittering jewels and sparkling diamonds, and Mittens couldn't believe her eyes. She reached out to touch one of the diamonds, and as she did, she felt a sudden surge of magic. She looked down and saw that her paws had turned into hands, and she was no longer a kitten. She was a young girl, and she was amazed at her transformation. She looked around the room and saw a beautiful golden key on a pedestal. She picked it up and felt a tingling sensation in her fingers. Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her and turned to see a group of goblins entering the room. Mittens realized that the goblins were after the treasure, and she knew she had to protect it. She grabbed the golden key and held it out in front of her, hoping it would somehow defend her. To her surprise, the key began to glow, and a beam of light shot out from it, hitting the goblins and knocking them to the ground. Mittens realized that the key was magical, and she was grateful for its protection. She ran out of the cave, the key in hand, and made her way back to the garden. She ran through the gates and saw her mother waiting for her, a worried look on her face. "Mittens, where have you been?" her mother asked. "I've been looking all over for you." "I'm sorry, Mother," Mittens said, panting. "I went on an adventure and found a magical forest. And I found this key, which helped me defeat a group of goblins and escape." Her mother's eyes widened in surprise. "This key is very powerful," she said. "You must keep it safe and use it wisely. And remember, always be careful when you go on adventures." Mittens nodded, understanding the importance of her mother's words. She vowed to be more careful in the future, and to use the magic of the key only when necessary. She thanked her mother for her love and protection, and together, they went back to the house to rest and enjoy the rest of the day. Chapter 3: The Enchanted Castle. As Mittens grew older, she became more and more confident in her abilities. She spent her days exploring the garden and the surrounding forest, and she often went on adventures with her friend Whiskers. One day, as they were out exploring, they came across a beautiful castle in the distance. It was surrounded by a moat and had tall towers and a grand entrance. Mittens and Whiskers were fascinated by the castle and decided to take a closer look. They snuck up to the castle gates and peered inside. They saw a group of knights practicing their sword fighting, and they saw a princess in a beautiful dress walking through the gardens. Mittens and Whiskers knew they had found an enchanted place. They watched in awe as the princess walked up to a fountain in the center of the gardens. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial of magic potion. She uncorked the vial and poured the potion into the fountain, and as she did, the water began to bubble and glow. Mittens and Whiskers couldn't believe their eyes. They watched as the princess walked away, and as soon as she was out of sight, they ran to the fountain to see if the potion was still there. They saw that the vial was empty, but the water in the fountain was still glowing. Mittens couldn't resist the temptation, and she reached out and touched the water. Suddenly, she felt a tingling sensation in her fingers, and she saw a cloud of sparkles rising from the water. She looked down and saw that she was no longer a young girl, but a princess, just like the one she had seen earlier. Whiskers gasped in amazement. "You're a princess," he exclaimed. "And look, I'm a prince." He looked down and saw that he had also transformed into a prince. Mittens and Whiskers were overjoyed at their transformations. They ran around the gardens, laughing and twirling. They saw the knights practicing their sword fighting and decided to join in. They each grabbed a sword and started sparring, having the time of their lives. As the sun began to set, Mittens and Whiskers knew it was time to go home. They thanked the fountain for its magic and ran back to the garden, eager to share their adventure with their families. Chapter 4: The Great Adventure. Mittens and Whiskers had many more adventures together, and as they grew older, they became the best of friends. They went on quests and explored new lands, always ready for whatever adventures came their way. One day, they received a letter from the Queen, inviting them to a great adventure. They were to join a group of knights and travel to a far-off kingdom to defeat an evil sorcerer and save the princess. Mittens and Whiskers were thrilled at the opportunity. They packed their bags and set off on the journey, accompanied by the Queen's bravest knights. They traveled through mountains and forests, across rivers and deserts, until they finally arrived at the kingdom. The kingdom was in chaos. The sorcerer had cast a spell over the land, causing darkness and destruction. The people were scared and desperate, and they looked to Mittens and Whiskers for help. Mittens and Whiskers knew they had to act fast. They gathered their courage and set out to find the sorcerer. They searched through the castle and the surrounding lands, and finally, they found him in his tower. The sorcerer was a powerful and wicked magician, and he was not happy to see Mittens and Whiskers. He attacked them with a barrage of spells, but Mittens and Whiskers were ready for him. They used their magic and their swords to defend themselves, and before long, they had overpowered the sorcerer. The sorcerer fell to the ground, defeated. The people of the kingdom rejoiced, and the princess was freed from her spell. Mittens and Whiskers were hailed as heroes, and they were rewarded with treasure and honors. But they knew that the greatest reward was the joy of helping others and making the world a better place. They returned home, grateful for their great adventure, and ready for whatever adventures came their way next.
If you want a special story or fairy tale just for you, leave a comment with the topic, characters, and any special requests you may have. We'll do our best to bring your unique take to life.